Hi, good evening everyone. My name is Sarah Eshelman. I'm going to be talking about the civil war in Syria for Government 653 in Dr. Magoo's class. So far in Syria, it's a bloodbath. You have the opposition forces against the Syrian army, al-Assad's army, and both are fighting for the same things, but for different reasons. Al-Assad's army is fighting to keep control and keep the regime and maintain military power. And he did say that freedom of speech and freedom of protest were his two big priorities in the beginning, during his election. But since then, some things have changed. Well, a lot of things have changed, and now he's being accused of war crimes. So the Syrian people created their own opposition and want to overthrow al-Assad. And ironically, they have just as much against them as al-Assad in terms of using nuclear weapons and using torture as means of obtaining submission and execution, death, and starvation. There currently is no gas or electricity in the cities, and Damascus is in total ruins. If you take a look at the first slide, this civil war in Syria is not like any other war. It's nothing like it was in October 1973 against Israel. And it wasn't a common enemy. This was an enemy happening within their own walls, within their own city, within their own nation, supplying arms and weapons and missiles and chemicals of mass destruction against their own brothers and sisters and children. It's a war like they've never seen before. Slide 3. And the Turkish Prime Minister, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, calls on al-Assad to resign and warns that he faces the same fate as Benito Mussolini and Gaddafi, leaders that were all killed by their own people. And he's telling al-Assad, he's like, this is going to happen to you too. So you have an entire force of women on the front lines and children on the front lines and men, and they're all working together on both sides. You have these civilians that are rising up against the regime and against the Syrian army, and then you have the same type of people fighting on the other side. And the force is completely voluntary. The women are serving 4.5 shifts. They're carrying on as if they're normal day-to-day operations with AK-47s in their hands, and they just go back to work after their time, and their children are doing the same. So it's the same people, just on different sides of the house. And both are willing to die and defend their homeland, just to have go about different ways of doing it. The next slide. The UN peace agreement date is scheduled in January 2014. This will be the Geneva Convention 2. The Geneva 2, excuse me. And what was interesting enough is missiles are being launched by al-Assad's army into the streets of Syria and the streets of Damascus, killing his own people, but yet he says that he wants to put an end to the violence. He's creating part of the violence. There's enough to blame on both sides of the house. Neither one side is innocent. Next slide. Rebel groups largely do not believe that talks will result in the demand, Assad being removed from power. They don't see this as happening. So they believe that they need to fight till his death, or fight till their own, and whichever comes first. They don't really see an end in sight in Syria. They don't see any safe places to go. And the groups accuse him of war crimes and wholesale bombings of neighborhoods to wipe out rebel enclaves and killing women and children in their attacks. Children are used as leverage and killed in front of their own families, and trying to obtain submission. And the next slide. And as you can see, these are normal civilians with their weapons hanging on the walls. They are just every average day joining together and creating their own militias. And the scale of viciousness of abuses is just beginning. And it's tragic on both sides. And as you can see, the children in the bloody streets of their own hometown. Leaving their homes in shambles and their buildings and their infrastructure gone. Increased sanctions, leaving out no international cooperation. Next slide. Millions of refugees, many of fleeing. Children, women, men have made perilous journeys across the borders in search of safety. They're traumatized, left physically damaged, wounded, dying of illness and disease. The UN is putting out a daily report of the death toll. And my paper had the last death toll was 120,000 lives. Next slide. Almost 28,000 rebel fighters have died, and more than 50,000 on the side of the government, including both regular soldiers and pro-regime militias. The latter figure also includes almost 500 dead from the Lebanese Hezbollah movement and other foreign Shia militias. And that concludes my presentation on Syria. It is graphic, very graphic, and I apologize I didn't warn you in advance. There is no such thing as a war that doesn't come without violence and death and atrocity, and hopefully something can be resolved in this January 22nd, 2014 convention in the Security Council. Hopefully something will be resolved. If not, the violence is just going to continue and the bloodshed will just keep happening. Thank you. It's been a wonderful semester. It's been great sharing with all of you, and I look forward to seeing you in the next upcoming semester.